Hello and welcome to another episode of Chairlift Philosophy. In this episode we're going to be talking about the harm principle. As it dates back to John Stuart Mill in his book On Liberty, he was talking more in the sense of power and exerting power over others. I'll be talking more in the sense of the cultural phenomena of the no harm principle. You can essentially do whatever you want in life as long as you don't hurt anyone else. You've probably heard this before. You're free to do whatever you please, but make sure you don't hurt anyone. That's the one caveat that we add to our actions in life. So as I said before, John Stuart Mill intended this more as a legalistic principle. But with the moral vacuum we find in today's society, I'd say it's more been adopted as more of a general guiding principle that people take nowadays, to do whatever you want as long as you don't hurt anyone else. Now this sounds fair enough. There doesn't seem to be much wrong with it, but I'd say there are two main issues that you could take up with this, and they both stem from the same problem of living under this principle. So the definition, I'd say, is both too broad and too strict, and it both stems from a vagueness in terms. So it's too broad in the sense that it can apply to anything. So what do we mean by harm? We do mean psychological harm, moral harm, physical harm. This isn't enough to go by, because we could say, oh, that's what I meant when I said don't hurt anyone. Do we mean yourself? Are you included in the people that you're not supposed to harm? And then we can say any behaviours you undertake could be argued to be harmful, such as taking drugs or drinking excessively. These things could still be perceived as coming under the principle of harming someone, and therefore not really going with the intention of the principle itself of doing what you want as long as you don't hurt anyone. In the same sense, it can be seen as being too strict, because when we say harm, this could be a parent harming their child by not letting them stay up as late as they want or eat as much sugar as they want. You know, it's really speaking, harm can mean anything. I wouldn't say in those instances that the parent was acting improper or immoral, just that it doesn't fit the terminology of our principle. The other criticism I'd have of this principle would be that the implications of it. So we might say it doesn't say this specifically, but it kind of can be used as a justification for inaction, because as long as you're not hurting anyone, it doesn't matter what you're doing, you know. And it kind of limits us in a sense of our moral capabilities of being good people. So it tells us nothing of acting virtuously in the sense of being courageous or kind to other people. These don't matter in a sense, according to this principle. We just have to not hurt people, and the buck stops there. As though our behaviour has no moral valence beyond harming others, whatever that might mean. Is it not also harmful to yourself to only seek out immediate gratification and never develop your moral character, for example? Western culture has been firmly set on this liberal idea of being free to do whatever you want, certainly in a legal sense, bar obviously certain conditions. But should this be extended to the moral sense as well? This was a key theme of Solzhenitsyn's 1978 Harvard address, which I'll play a clip from here.
Western society has given itself the organization best suited to its purposes, based, I would say, on the letter of the law. The limits of human rights and righteousness are determined by a system of laws. Such limits are very broad. People in the West have acquired considerable skill in interpreting and manipulating law. Any conflict is solved according to the letter of the law, and this is considered to be the supreme solution. If one is right from a legal point of view, nothing more is required. Nobody may mention that one could still not be entirely right, and urge self-restraint, a willingness to renounce such legal rights, sacrifice and selfless risk. It would sound simply absurd. One almost never sees voluntary self-restraint. Everybody operates at the extreme limit of those legal frames.
Всю жизнь проведя под коммунизмом,
I have spent all my life under a communist regime, and I will tell you
ужасно то общество,
that a society without any objective legal scale is a terrible one indeed.
но общество,
But a society
в котором
with
нет
no
других
other
весов,
scale but
кроме
the legal
юридического,
one,
тоже
is not
малодостойный
quite
человек.
worthy of man either.
Общество,
A society
ставшее на почву
which is
закона, но
based
не
on the
выше,
letter of the law and never
слабо
reaches
использует
any higher,
высоту
is taking
человеческих
very
возможностей.
scarce advantage of the high level of human possibilities.
право
The
слишком
letter of the law
тронутое и
is too
формальное,
cold and formal
чтобы влиять на
to have
общество
a
благодетельно.
beneficial influence on society.
Когда вся жизнь
Whenever the tissue of life is woven of legalistic relations, there is an atmosphere of moral mediocrity,
омертвляющая
paralyzing man's noblest impulses.
перед испытаниями же грозящего
And it will be simply impossible to stand through the trials of this threatening century with only the support of a legalistic structure.
Now I can hear one response very clearly in response to my response, which would be that the no harm principle doesn't preclude you from going beyond it. It only sets a minimum requirement of just not harming people. It doesn't mean you can't also be a good person or also do some good stuff. It just means that you don't have to do that, whereas harming people is a requisite that you should never cross that threshold. This can bring us back to how we formulate the no harm principle. So if we water it down and it becomes a weaker version, we can we're essentially just saying don't hurt people, and beyond that we're not sure what we really mean. And again, I think this isn't saying much. It's quite vague and it implies the wrong thing. And maybe I would say the minimum requirement of people should go beyond just not harming people, you know, especially in a moral sense. You're not just here to go through the motions. There's a better version of you that I'd say have an obligation to become, not just to not hurt anyone, and it doesn't really matter who you are and what moral development you go through. And this brings me to my next point, is having the baseline of moral action being not to be harmless it sends the wrong message. It's the wrong implication. As Jordan Peterson talks a lot about, you have to, in order to be a virtuous person, you can't just be harmless. You have to at least have the capability of being harmful. And maybe this is also a sense in which the harm principle gets behaviour wrong, because sometimes the best moral behaviour can be harmful. Here's a clip of Jordan Peterson laying out the ideas of being virtuous require you not to be harmless.
Well, if you're harmless, you're not virtuous. You're just harmless. You're like a rabbit. A rabbit isn't virtuous. It just can't do anything except get eaten. It's not virtuous. If you're a monster and you don't act monstrously, then you're virtuous. But you also have to be a monster. Well, you see this all the time. Harry Potter's like that too. It's like he's flawed, he's hurt, he's got evil in him. He can talk to snakes, man. He breaks rules all the time. All the time. He's not obedient at all. But you know, he has a good reason for breaking the rules. And if he couldn't break the rules, him and his little clique of rule-breaking, you know, troublemakers, if they didn't break the rules, they wouldn't attain the highest goal. So it's very peculiar, but it's a very, very common mythological notion. You know, the hero has to be a monster, but a controlled monster. Batman is like that, you know. I mean, it's everywhere.
Now for my media moment. So this is probably the hardest media moment I've ever had to come up with, and I couldn't really think of a specific example, but I could think of a general idea which comes in the form of Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, which he outlines in his book The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And this is like an archetypal story structure of stories and myths which goes through how a character develops, and it essentially outlines how you leave a place of comfort or familiarity like a home, and the hero moves out into the world and accepts challenges and adversity, and then he comes back having changed and becomes a better person because of it. And it's not because he was harmless and stayed in that place of familiarity, it's because he entered the dangerous areas of his life and didn't just do what he wanted, but did what he was obligated to do, did what he responded to, a call to adventure rather than just the call to sit on his sofa. The question we want to ask ourselves is, what place do we want to take in the world? One of minimizing our impact and just seeking our own wants and gratifications wherever we want it, or one of virtue where we can make meaningful changes in the world? Do we stay in the hero's first stage, the place of moral and personal comfort, or do we answer the call to adventure and develop ourselves as a person as a result of that?